Welcome, new and old friends. I just have a couple things to say, and then the stories will begin. Before you drift off into the dream realm, please remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment. If you'd like to find out about my social links, my website, how to help the channel, check the description box. Now turn off your lights, make sure your doors and windows are locked. It's time to dream. As an Army veteran, the hardest part of war wasn't taking the life of another person during combat. The hardest part came after we returned home when we had to remain quiet and pretend that the only thing we fought out there were humans. I'm an FBI agent who hunts serial killers. This latest serial killer doesn't seem human. By CIAHerpes. A quick warning before this story starts. There is talk of children being abused as well as children dying. There is also lots of descriptions of blood. So, viewer discretion is advised, but I do hope you enjoy. As an FBI agent in an elite homicide unit, I was often tasked with tracking down the worst of humankind. But one case in particular really stays with me, and to this day still haunts my nightmares. Within the agency, we called him the Vampire of Frost Hollow, and the name was certainly a fitting one. We found the victims with bite marks all over their bodies. They also showed signs of extensive torture as well as mutilation both before and after death. In some cases, glasses from their kitchens had been used to collect warm blood from their dying, struggling bodies of the victims. Others had organs removed. We would eventually find out why, and the reason was horrifying beyond anything I could have imagined. Agent Stone and I drove through the flat city streets as pale moonlight illuminated everything in a harsh glare. The summer heat still sizzled from the pavement. Everything felt muggy and wet, and dark storm clouds had gathered over the city. The house laid up ahead, just a flat, one-story place with no distinguishing characteristics. It was painted a dull blue and had a freshly mowed lawn. It looked like it could have been copied and pasted from 100 similar houses scattered throughout the area. But it was what was inside that distinguished this house. Police cars blocked off the street in front of the crime scene. The lights and sirens were turned off, always an ominous sign at a crime scene. I always knew that when the police weren't rushing anymore, it meant the victims were too far gone for help. A couple of gawkers stood there as well, 2 teenage girls. One of them had their hair dyed a bright pink with streaks of black in it. Many silver necklaces twinkled around her neck. A few cops unstrung spools of yellow crime scene tape warning people to stay off the property. An obese police officer with a face like a walrus and a large, drooping mustache walked up to our black, unmarked sedan. "Sorry, guys," he said as I rolled down my window. "Road's closed." I gave him a faint smile and pulled out my federal identification card and badge. His eyes widened for a brief moment. "Jesus, your FBI guys are here already?" "This is the second case where people have had blood drained from their bodies in this section of town," I said with venom. "Of course we're here. Whenever we smell smoke, there's usually a much larger fire under the surface. If there are 2 separate incidences we can prove, then there may be more that we can't prove or haven't connected yet." The police officer nodded his fat face, jiggling his so many chins. He smoothed his mustache contemplatively as he stared at us. Were you at the first crime scene for the unsub? Agent Stone asked the state cop. The police officer gave us a grim smile, wetting his small, rubbery lips. His tiny teeth glittered white, but the smile had no real mirth in it. Yes, I was there, he said coldly. He reached out his hand to me. I'm Officer Paisley. Rick was my friend, though. He gave a short bark of laughter at this, though I didn't see what was funny about it. What do you think about this guy? I asked, always curious to know what the local cops thought. Officer Paisley shrugged his round shoulders, reminding me of Humpty Dumpty in his general body shape. I think he's one sick SOB, Officer Paisley said blandly, looking away. I saw what he did to that family over on Turtleback Lane. You know what the cops call him? The Vampire Frost Hollow. Quite a nickname, huh? I remember looking through the crime scene reports of the first murder scene. It had indeed been a horrifying experience just reading through the sterile police description of the homicide and looking at the photographs. In the first crime scene, there had been a husband and a wife murdered in the kitchen, the hearts taken out of their bodies, the blood drained from them. In the living room, they found an infant in a crib. His entire chest cavity had been ripped open, as if with claws. Everything once inside his small, fragile body was strewn about the room like garbage. The tiny intestines hung from the wall of the crib, unspooled like a bloody snake. They found the 7-year-old daughter hanging from a tree in the backyard, her eyes removed, her chest cut open down the middle. The black socket stared sightlessly ahead. Her pale skin showed that her blood, too, had been drained. I wondered what nightmare awaited us at this crime scene, now that I would get to experience firsthand and not just through pictures and documents. Agent Stone parked the car and stared at me with his cold blue eyes. Let's go, he whispered, looking pale and uncertain. The police officer at the door waved us through the threshold. Inside, it was dark. I put on my latex glove and tried to flick on the lights, but nothing happened. Agent Stone and I pulled out our flashlights, turning them on. The white glare of the LEDs made everything seem overly saturated and unreal. The power's out, I said. My voice sounded far too loud in the dark confines of the house. The shadow pressed in on us like the walls of a coffin. Agent Stone hastily stumbled ahead, flashing his light to the left and right. At first we saw nothing out of place. We had entered a dining room with a long rectangular table and an antique grandfather clock that eerily ticked away, marking each moment of time. Where's the bodies? Agent Stone whispered, glancing nervously around. We kept going forward into the kitchen, and there we found the first of the victims. It was a woman, and she had been young and beautiful when she was murdered, even through the layers of clotted blood and the gore that covered her body like a carpet. I could see that. She had green eyes like a cat that stared sightlessly up at the ceiling, still filled with horror, even in death. Her chest was ripped open, and a dark, ragged socket marked the spot where her heart had been. Her grisly death mask showed the incomprehensible agonies she must have gone through before the merciful release of oblivion finally took her away. Next to her stood a blender filled with slurry of organs and Coca-Cola. The half-empty bottle stood next to it, still fizzing quietly on the table. Other than our breathing, it was the only sound in the room, eerie and constant like the last bubbling gasp of a dying man. Everything sounded muted, almost like how sounds become muffled and distant during a snowstorm. And there was no snow here, no storms at all.
What's your verdict, Harper?
Agent Stone asked, his face revealing nothing as he looked at me. I think we're probably dealing with a paranoid schizophrenic, but it's odd, I said, looking at the crime scene with a sickening feeling of revulsion raising in my chest. I pressed it back down, focusing on the job. From what I read at the last crime scene and from what I'm seeing here, it looks like a combination of both organized and disorganized features. There is clear evidence of planning. He picked the locks at both residences and covered the cameras with paint.
Whoever he is, he's drinking the victim's blood and organs,
Agent Stone said, a quick flash of disgust crossing his face before it reverted back to a stony mask.
I'm thinking a white male between the ages of 20 and 40.
I nodded. Serial killers almost always target victims within their own race, after all, and all the victims so far had been white. It was a comfort thing for many, I believe, though there's always an exception like Richard Ramirez, who would kill a variety of victim types of any race or gender. The age was just pure probability, as most serial killers begin their sprees around the age of 15 to 30. There could be a dozen more victims stretching back a period of years connected to this unsub for all we knew. Agents at the FBI were looking through cold case files, trying to look for any connection to this blood drinker we now hunted. Where's the rest of the family? I asked, looking forward past the threshold leading into the kitchen, where a smeared trail of blood curved down the hallway. Agent Stone just shook his head, careful not to walk on any of the blood splatters on the floor and walls. In front of us, the hallway opened onto doors on both sides. I looked into the first one, seeing a little boy's room decorated with posters of cartoon characters. It was empty, however. The bed was still neatly made. It looked like the little boy had just stepped out and would be back any moment. The truth made my heart ache. I felt the rising sense of sickness as I thought about the fact that he would never see this room again. The next one was the master bedroom. A large bed stood in the center of the room, surrounded by mahogany cabinets and dressers. Laying across the bed, I found the dead woman's husband. He looked like Jesus on the cross, his arms spread out on both sides of him, his legs tightly coiled together. The unsub had wrapped razor wire around his wrists and ankles. The victim was naked from the waist up and had deep slash marks on his chest and neck. The slashes seemed to form some occult symbol, though I didn't recognize it immediately. The symbols looked like 3 upside-down triangles of ascending size contained with each other in the center, followed by a circle that 8-point decorated like a lotus flower around it. His eyes and eyelids were both gone, giving him a look of horror and surprise. The black sockets dribbled dark, cloud blood as they stared sightlessly up at oblivion. His mouth had been slashed from ear to ear, giving him a mutilated face and an insane, manic grin.
What's that symbol?
Agent Stone asked, sounding mesmerized. He took a step forward towards the body, but I put a steady hand out to stop him. I've seen it before, I said, but I can't remember where. I think it was in some college class about religion years ago. The memory felt like a word on the tip of my tongue, but the connection wouldn't come. I shook my head. We'll take a picture and send it to the lab. They'll be able to look it up. Does this change your profile for the unsub? Agent Stone said, smirking slightly. I shrugged. It seems to suggest more organization than I previously thought, and perhaps some realization to occult rituals, I said. This case just gets weirder and weirder. Little did I realize that I hadn't seen anything yet. Things were about to get very strange in the next few minutes. We found the 2 children, a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl, in the bathroom, their bodies intertwined like rats in a rat king in the tub. Their limbs were locked around each other in a death embrace. Rigor mortis had hardened their faces into a grimace of terror. The tub was half filled with bloody pink water. Their throats were cut from ear to ear, nearly severing their heads from their bodies. Their hearts had been removed from both of their chests, leaving a dark, gaping hole of ragged bones and gore behind.
God,
Agent gasped, looking pale and off balance.
we gotta get this son of a bitch.
Maybe it's more than one person, I said, thinking back to the occult symbols carved on the dead man's chest. What if we're dealing with a cult? Something like the Manson family.
The Manson family didn't drink blood and liquefied organs.
Agent Stone spat angrily.
I think what we're dealing with...
He stopped speaking suddenly, his eyes widening as he looked past my head. Out the bathroom window, I glanced behind and gasped. I saw 2 pale glowing eyes, the color of cold moonlight. The flesh ran down in dribbles and rivets, as if the skin was liquefied and dripping off like water. It looked like an abomination was melting under the effects of a corrosive acid. A hairless face shone white, his visage like flat, overlapping plates of bone. It had no nose, and its teeth glimmered like long silver needles. It put its long, twisted fingers to the window, leaving trails of blood as its fingertips lightly stroked the glass. It grinned at us with its lipless mouth before sinking down and disappearing from view.
What in the fuck was that?
Agent Stone whispered, quickly backpedaling out of the bathroom and away from the window. He stepped in the smear trail of blood. With a sticky, tacky sound, he pulled his loafer free and stumbled away. I felt stunned for a long moment, still staring out the window, expecting to see the mysterious face return. But nothing stirred outside. Everything seemed deathly quiet. "Wait!" I cried, running after him. He stumbled towards the front door, pulling out his gun and cocking it. The semi-automatic pistol cracked with the sound like bones snapping. Agent Stone flung open the door and stepped outside. Taking a deep breath, I took out my gun and followed after. The streetlights cast the empty sidewalk in a harsh glare. The constant tick, tick, tick of their flickering seemed like the only sound in the world at that moment, other than the fast, panicked breathing of Agent Stone and myself. "Where is everyone?" I whispered futilely. The police cars were still here, blocking off the road, but the police themselves were nowhere in sight. The entire street was deserted. I didn't see a single person anywhere. When I had driven up, there had been at least a couple of gawkers on the sidewalk, too. Sounds were muted and eerie. Each one of our footsteps echoed on the empty street. And yet I didn't hear a single bird or heard any crickets chirping. No mosquitoes buzzing around my head. It had seemed as if we had entered a mirror world that looked identical, just without the people and animals.
"Hello?"
Agent Stone yelled. His voice reverberated back to us as if he had screamed into a cave. I grabbed his arm and shaked my head.
Don't,
I hissed through gritted teeth. Don't yell. I have a feeling that we're not alone. As Agent Stone's cries echoed off into the distance, I heard a new sound, heavy footsteps, like the pounding hooves of running deer. Someone screamed nearby. On the other side of the street, I saw one of the gawkers stumble out, the girl with the pink hair. She was covered in slashes, her black clothes sliced up and wet with blood. Her eyes had rolled back in her head, the whites glimmering pale in their sockets. Her body shook, her fingers clenched and unclenched as if a seizure were ripping its way through her muscles. I realized with horror that she was floating above the sidewalk a few inches above, her feet angled down. With her wide eyes, she looked straight at me and spoke. "The melting man is coming for you," she whispered in a voice like a shadow. "He's going to make you scream for death before the end. He can smell your blood like sweet flowers in the springtime. He's coming with the power and might of the screaming goddess. Her dance will come tonight and destroy this place with her poisoned breath. The sacrifice have opened the door, for worthy are the lambs." Then the girl fell hard to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. A gunshot pierced the night from behind us, then a high-pitched bellowing scream followed in its wake. I spun, my heart thudding. I now knew that we weren't dealing with a regular serial killer. Officer Paisley came running up from the backyard, his fat body heaving. Rivers of sweat ran down his face. He saw me and Agent Stone and came sprinting towards us, his eyes wide and consumed by an animal panic.
"It's after me,"
he shrieked. As he got closer, I saw splatters of blood covering his face like raindrops, the deep thumping of pounding feet increasing in speed and intensity. From behind the house came a creature with dripping flesh, the one the girl had called the melted man. Wrapped around his body, I saw ancient, rusted chains that dug deep into his chest. They spiraled up his torso and fused into the skin. The flesh dripped over them like putrefying drops of pus. His eyes seemed to glow with a cold white light that reminded me of winter starlight. The melted man loomed over Officer Paisley, his body 9 or 10 feet tall. His legs crackled with the snapping of bones and the strange twisting of his many joints. Though thin and emaciated as a death camp victim, he moved with an inhuman speed. His arms looked skeletal and long, lunging out towards Officer Paisley like the branches of a tree.
"Holy shit,"
Agent Stone whispered. I saw his hand trembling, the pistol gripped tightly in his clenched fists, the knuckles white. He blinked fast, inhaled deep, and raised the gun. With a booming shot like thunder, the gun went off, hitting the melted man in the torso. Black blood bubbled out from the wound. The chain slithered around his body like a snake. They unwound, loosened, and tightened in a rhythmic parasailing wave. Within a few moments, the rusted spiral of chains had wrapped around the bullet wound and, almost caressingly, they covered the deep crater in his torso. The sound of the gunshot gave me a shot of adrenaline that sent me into action. As the melted man drew within a few feet of Officer Paisley, I aimed at his head and fired. The bullet smashed into his white, bony skull with a splash of black blood and splattering of liquefied flesh and bone splinters. The melted man gave a wail like some ancient dinosaur, a cacophony of furious roaring.
"Get back,"
Agent Stone cried to me, his eyes wide with fear, but I was already quickly backpedaling away from the abomination. Officer Paisley was only a few paces from us when the chains on the melted man's body shot out like a spear. Officer Paisley gave a cry like a strangled rabbit as a sharp point at the end of the chains burst through his chest, a blossoming flower of blood spurting from his ruptured heart. Officer Paisley looked down, surprised, the blood bubbling and frothing over his lips. Then he fell slowly forward, and the melted man pulled his chains back. He looked over us with his glowing eyes and grinned.
"The final sacrifice,"
he grumbled in a voice withered with infection and sickness.
"The blood offering for the goddess. She comes."
The melted man knelt down, his inhuman long body twisted as he ran his fingers leveling across the blood pooling under Officer Paisley's body. He brought it up to his bone-white face. As drops of fresh dripping off his chin, a snake-like tongue shot out and tasted the blood. He looked up at us and grinned. There was a feeling in the air like electricity, an opposing silence hanging over the street. The sky was as dark as a midnight funeral, and the stars and the moons winked out. I looked up, seeing an enormous black shape descending from above. It was a massive female form with 4 arms and a human skull hanging around her neck. Her skin looked as black as a centipede's, glossy and shiny. She danced as she came down, her legs kicking and arms jerking in a rhythmic motion. As I watched her dance, an overwhelming feeling of dread and horror came over me. As she descended, her dance quickened, and the waves of terror rushed out from her body like ripples in a pond. I could almost see them, like a blanket of shadows fluttering out in a circle. I saw Agent Stone turn and run, blindly sprinting away. I wanted to call out to him, to tell him to wait, to not leave me alone with this thing. But I could only stare open-mouthed at the dancing goddess as she came down on the street. She was as tall as a house, looking down at the body of Officer Paisley.
"My goddess, my queen, ruler of death and destruction, this is for you,"
the melted man hissed through his skeletal lips. The goddess looked down at the body, her sharp, pointed talons of fingers reaching down and ripping out Paisley's heart from the still corpse. The ribs cracked, the flesh separated easily. Officer Paisley's eyes continued to stare sightlessly up at the black, formless sky. The goddess opened her fanged mouth, and I could see swirling pools of darkness inside, silent screams echoing out from some eternity within. With a deep sigh of pleasure, she put the heart into her mouth and bit down, saying blood dripping down her face. I heard a car start behind me. The melted man and the goddess looked in my direction with a sudden noise. Her dark eyes shone with hunger, the melted man with insanity.
"A blood sacrifice,"
the goddess sighed, her lips splitting into a wide smile, showing off her predator teeth.
"This one should suffer. The agony makes the blood taste sweeter.
The melted man laughed and started towards me. I still had the pistol in my hand, but what good would it do? I raised it in a last-ditch effort to slow the abomination, knowing it was hopeless. I fired, aiming at the melted man's face as the goddess danced and twisted behind him. I felt the mortal terror emanating from her body like currents of air. I resisted the urge to simply throw down my pistol and flee blindly into the night. The bullet missed, and the grinning abomination rushed at me. A car engine revved directly behind me. It roared past me, missing me by inches. The semi slammed into the melted man, crushing his legs with the sound of shattering bones. He went flying back as the chains on his body fell out in all directions, attacking everything around him at once. They hit trees and bushes and the walls of houses with the sound of clanging metal. They reverberated in the air. I saw Agent Stone driving the sedan, frantically motioning me inside. I jumped in the seat as the goddess soared into the air and followed after us.
Fuck!
He cried, accelerating as fast as the car would allow. He swerved around the withering body of the melted man, who lay on the road twisting his limbs like a stinging hornet. Blood the color of soot pooled under his body. The melted man slowly crawled away, pulling himself forward with his skeletal arms. The goddess flew close behind us, even as Agent Stone pushed the car up to 70 and 80 miles an hour on this residential street. I looked back, seeing only a curtain of shimmering black shadows, her arms wrapping around the car. I felt the back of it fishtail suddenly. "Drive faster!" I screamed, panicked. "She's..." But at that moment, the back of the car was lifted off the ground. We were spinning, the world flying around us in circles. I heard the crunching of metal and the shattering of glass. My vision turned black for a few moments. I felt dazed, sick, and on the verge of throwing up. Waves of dread gripped my heart like skeletal hands. Off in the distance, sirens roared, blue and red lights flashed. The goddess looked down the street, seeing a caravan of police cars and unmarked black SUVs approach the area. With a laugh like tearing of metal, she took off into the air. "Released, finally released on this world," she cried as she disappeared from view. Police and agents quickly surround us, pulling us out of the crumpled car. I was fine, just a bit shaken up and bruised. Agent Stone had a deep gash across his forehead from where he had hit his head during the crash, but he was otherwise unharmed. When the police went to the crime scene, they didn't find any evidence of the melted man or the goddess there. Only a pool of black blood congealed on the pavement, showing that any of it had been real at all. I refuse to believe the 8-year-old child in front of me is my missing little boy, even though he had the same mole on his face, same eyes, hair, same everything. How could he still be a child when we lost him 20 years ago? Hunting Rules by System C. Welcome to the forest. Glad you finally got a license for hunting and decided to join me. Here's some rules pertaining to my forest. 1. Be quiet. If I can hear you, so can everything else. 2. Mark the tree with chalk, specifically a shade of pink. Stuff here can't tell the difference between it and blood, and they won't pay any mind to blood on the trees as long as the sun is up. 3. Don't shoot the female deers. Bullets don't work on them, and they get upset you tried to kill them. So do I. 4. Gauge whether an animal is a baby or not based on its sound. If you hear something bigger nearby, and that's a baby, you should reload fast if you decide to shoot it. I've learned to just keep a second rifle on me, but feel free to try the trick. 5. Everything in the forest is free game because I own the acres it's on. Don't be afraid to shoot, it's all okay. They know hunters exist as hunters know they exist. 6. I know you brought your own food, but leave it at the car. I'd rather a doe not come up too close to us if she smells food. She'll assume you're the food. 7. You and I are the only humans hunting. See any other humans and you tell me without them knowing you saw them. I'll hound them. They can't hurt me. 8. At any point you find a buck, don't shoot until I see it too. While not hostile, those things are like police sirens when injured. We both shoot it and make sure it doesn't alert the whole forest. 9. Bullets don't work on me either. Hope you have a carving knife. 10. The forest has the occasional sunspot where flowers grow. You will find lizards or snakes sunbathing on rocks. Not both. If you see both, turn around and walk back the way you came. One of those things is not a lizard or a snake. And last time I checked, neither make a chirp sound. 11. The native birds are usually crows, ducks, and geese. It's easier to shoot the latter, but try not to shoot a crow. Those things generally will attack you if you even shoot at one. 12. I had a statue put in a while back. It's a statue of me, of course. When you see it, take a selfie. Make sure the camera recognizes only you and my stone face. Even a half second of detecting something else and you want to come find me. I don't want to lose another human. 13. When we're done, we need to remove all the chalk before sundown, as they know we were here and the crows that live here are both snitches and trackers. I prefer a crow not follow us home. But if one does, you drive, I'll shoot. They can't hurt me. I think that's everything, but if not, hopefully we just get a few animals and then we're done for the day. Come on, we're so excited for the hunt.
Remove all the hair on your body if you want to live, he said. Then he handed me a pair of tweezers. Sinking Feeling by Refrigerator North 663. I'd be the first to call myself a paranoid person. Not so much to be incapacitating or dangerous, but compared to most people's average level of it, mine was bumped up above the standard deviation of whatever units you measure that sort of thing in. It hasn't caused me major problems in life, no relationship problems, no issues feigning during school. Sure, sometimes I took a few wrong turns on my drive home on purpose, but it never stopped me from doing what I wanted to. It also never stopped me from leaving my window open at night. My single bedroom was on the 5th floor. Although it was rather small, I thought it was quite fitting. Just enough room for a bed and a desk, and a nice big window facing out over the street. I often find myself sitting at that desk, closer to sunrise and sundown, just looking out over the street, letting the cool air wash over me. On the other side of the road was a solid wooden fence that ran the whole block and the backyard of a suburban home on the other side of it. The image of the tan-looking fence bathed by the single street lamp and the orange concrete siding on the street is forever burned in my mind because it was so often the background through which I saw the world. It was a quiet street, and after midnight you could expect not to see another car until the early birds got up at 4. Which is the main reason I did a double take tonight. Because the usual image was wrong. Out on the sidewalk, across the street, a dark human figure stood near the street lamp. My brain froze, momentarily in shock and terror. For a nanosecond, I was totally immobilized, and then the questions started to kick in. What is that? Who is that? What are they doing? How long have they been there? My last question was what stopped me. The human eye is designed primarily to detect motion, meaning I should have seen whoever it was there moving to the street lamp. Racking my brain, I found nothing, and worse, I had no unique recollection of the scene from outside my window from tonight at all. Yes, I knew what it normally looked like, but that was just an amalgamation of every other time over the past 2 years I've looked out the window. All those hundreds of images combined into one singular scene. It didn't help me at all, because it was wrong. There was no new entity on the scene now. The second thing about that question was the realization that it could have been standing there for a while. More than a while. Minutes maybe, 15, 20. It was close to 3 in the morning. God, he could have been standing there for over an hour by now. And doing what? By the looks of it, nothing. It had been maybe 10 seconds since I first laid eyes on it and ran through all the questions and thoughts. He was still standing there in the exact spot, motionless, but so was I. I sat at my desk, realizing I also hadn't moved yet. That gave me a sense of relief and a punch to the gut. Relief being that I hadn't drawn any attention to myself by staying up quickly and making noise or disturbance loud enough he could have noticed from down on the quiet street. Gut punch being something I had just told myself. The human eye is designed to detect motion. It's much easier to see something moving than something staying still. And it's not even close. Thank you, evolution, for that one. In fact, the brain will subconsciously register anything and everything that moves, making it faster than any conscious choice of observation. And given the still nature of the night, my guess is that he subconsciously is all out of options. Just sitting there locked and loaded, waiting for something to grab onto. Another 10 seconds or so had passed, and the both of us were still motionless. Him under the street lamp, and me sitting at my desk, looking out the window, 5 stories up. All of my problems at that moment came down to the human eye. I saw him, and now if I moved, he would see me. But the eye would also save me. Not my eye, but his. It all came down to something so singularly apparent that I was a fool for even forgetting it in the first place. Light. A quick mental survey of my room told me that my room was completely dark. The lights were off, my laptop was closed, and the lamp was off. That was good for me. The street lamp was also good for me, but only so far as it was bad for him. He was standing directly under it, meaning his eyes were receiving a lot more light than mine.
He had been staying there for at least a minute, and given how still the night had been before, I wager a couple minutes before I saw him at least. That was all good news for me. Great news. The best news I had gotten in weeks, because that meant his eyes were significantly less adjusted to darkness than mine were. It's like walking out of a movie theater. Normally you leave one, everything looks extremely bright, and it's hard to see anything because your eyes are so used to seeing things in your darkness. In this case, the same effect was helping me, but in reverse. Because of that, street lamps and the light coming from it, his eyes were effectively those of an 80-year-old with cataracts. He had been standing under there for minutes, and he probably could barely see his shoes if he looked down. There was no possible way he could see me, so I decided to move. Slow. The human eye is still one of the best in the world at noticing movement, so in this case, slow was the way to go. Slow is smooth. Smooth is natural. You're more likely to detect something moving unnatural than at a constant rate. I guess the goal was to be able to make you focus on the tiger jumping out at you rather than the river. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. A minute later, I had backed up out of my chair and now was standing at the back of my room, pressed up against the wall. It was well enough back that even if he was looking, he wouldn't have been able to see me through the window. I breathed out for what felt like the first time in an hour, and I could almost feel my heart slowing down now. I chuckled to myself about how stupid the whole thing was, but I still didn't know what they were doing. Waiting for the bus? No, there wasn't a bus stop on this street. Uber? Friend pickup? Maybe. Plausible. I laughed to myself. Surely they were waiting for someone to pick them up. If I had just answered that question first, I wouldn't have gone through all that trouble the last few minutes. I decided I should look again. I quickly regretted it. Moving slowly up to the desk again, I peered over and saw the familiar dark outline of a man standing under the street lamp. Same spot, same position. This time there was no question on my mind. I just stared at him for what felt like a long time. Finally, I blinked. When I opened my eyes again, I saw something else too. A little glint, probably the white of his eyes. It was the first time I had seen them. And for someone who had just run through a lot of problem solving about his eyes, it was curious that I hadn't realized that his eyes were never visible. The fact that they were now was not the problem. It was the fact they were pointed at me. I dropped, hit the deck, instantly. Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast bullshit all out the window. I practically slammed myself onto the ground with no subtlety. Now I was very afraid. I am getting that sinking feeling in my stomach now, and it's holding me to the ground, stopping me from getting up and looking back. That's when I started to type this all out. On my phone, I wrote down everything that just happened, and I'm glad I did. Very glad. Because I just heard a knock at the door. I walked through the front door to find my wife, blood oozing from jagged slashes in her wrists, and a graphic video of me with another woman playing on the computer screen behind her. As I cradled her body and wept, a new email alert popped up on the screen with the subject, "Hey Shane, we've sent you a free customized Ultimate Fantasy trademarked sample video produced by our cutting-edge generative AI, creating just using your profile picture."
For the past 14 days, I have been hunted by a monster. By NonToastedBread. My name is Lucien, and for the past 14 days, I have been chased by a monster. I should begin this by saying I'm not a good person, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to die here. So, this is my confession. It all started around 3 weeks ago. I was low on cash and about to be evicted. Me and my friend Jesus, a fat guy with ADHD, who always seems to look on the bright side, were living in the bad part of town, so we're willing to do almost anything for a few bucks. We were planning on selling some of our stuff when one of our roommates came in. Will was a short, skinny guy, had long hair and a mustache, and always had on this stained blue hoodie. He told us that a rich old guy was moving in near us and that we could do a quick snatch and run, then pawn the items. We had all stolen before. For Jesus, it was games. For me, it was weed. And for Will, it was cash. We were not strangers to the idea, but also didn't want to jump to it. Jesus was the first to reject. Come on, man, just 10 minutes in that house and we can pay off any of our debts and more. Will was enthused about this idea of his. What is there even worth grabbing? I couldn't help but question this, considering I didn't want to rob an old man for nothing. He's some collector of artifacts and stuff. One of them archaeologists or whatever. Will seemed proud of himself for this fact. Me and Jesus looked at each other before nodding. We were all at the end of our lines, and Will had convinced us. On the night of the break-in, we pulled up to the house in my van. We all brought masks and gloves. I had also brought a gun just in case we run into something, but thinking about it now, what was the old man going to attack us like some feral animal? We made it into the house after Jesus climbed the fence and locked the gate from inside. For being the heaviest, he was athletic. Will went in through a window and opened the door for us. We all started creeping around the guy's house, and contrary to what Will promised, there was nothing but talismans and notes. There was a few skeletons of animals around, but nothing worth big money. So we split up, all going in different directions. I was the one to come across it. In the side of the house was a leather-bound book with strange engravings on the front. It had jewels inlaid within the cover, and it was just sitting on a desk. Around the room were several notes hanging from the boards, all with strange symbols. I picked up the book, reading through it. One of the pages caught my eye. On it was the drawing of some sort of skinny creature with long arms and legs. Its head was some sort of deer skull. The writing seemed to be in Latin, and I tried mumbling the words out loud. I felt a prick from my finger, and the book felt warmer. From the doorway, the old man shouted, "Stop!" But it was too late. I dropped the book in surprise and pulled out my revolver, shooting the old man twice, once in the chest and the other in the neck. I grabbed the book and ran, the realization of what I had done setting in. Jesus was already back over the fence, and Will dived out the window to get back to the car. I got in the driver's seat as Will entered in the back, and Jesus was in the passenger seat. I started driving. I was about to go when Will shouted that something had his leg. I turned around and saw Will with some sort of dark claw hand grasping around his ankle. I pulled out my revolver and shot. The bullet hit the hand, but pierced Will's leg. I started driving, and from the side mirror I could see something pulling itself from the ground.
Then it started to run on all fours, this shambling mound of bones and rot. It was keeping pace with us. People saw us, people heard us. We had to keep moving, not to escape the law, but escape that thing. I drove all night. Jesus had checked his phone and our names were starting to spread. Will had used his belt and a pen to make a tourniquet for his wound. At some point, we lost track of that thing. We stopped at a gas station and got supplies for Will. We also got food and water, considering we were now wanted and probably not going to be able to show our faces for a while. As I unhooked the pump from the van, I saw in the distance some black mass scuttling in our direction. I squinted, and sure enough, there were 2 antlers. I quickly got in my car and drove. We kept driving, with me and Jesus swapping as drivers. Will started complaining about his leg, and there were scratch marks on it, heavily infected. Black goop seeped out of the slashes, and I helped wash it out and wrap it up. We talked about what it was, that thing following us, and I admitted that the book had something to do with it. We talked for a while, but after 4 days of traveling away from this relentless thing, we started to lose hope. Even with the translation, the book told us nothing. Will started to go pale and started to get reclusive, not talking. We kept on a steady pace, a few miles above this thing, just hoping it would leave. It has been 13 days. Will died yesterday. He begged me to end his pain, and after clumps of flesh from his leg started falling off, I used my revolver to help him. We have run out of food. It hasn't stopped, and we are about to run out of gas. I have 2 bullets left, and I'm hoping that whoever is listening to this doesn't make the same mistake as me. Me and Jesus hope that God forgives us. I think it's time we discuss the toxicity of this sub. If we don't surface and get fresh air, necrosis will start in our lungs and we'll all die over the next 8 hours. But if we do surface, we'll be exposing the rest of humanity to the virus we found in the depths. A Young Girl's Plea for Her Beloved Pet by I Don't Know a Name 101. Hello, Chloe. I really had the time of my life with you. You truly made my dreams come true and proved no one is a better friend than you. I hope you had just as much fun as I did because, unfortunately, this fun that has been granted to us has an end and its consequences. Immediately when you receive this letter, follow all the instructions carefully if you want a chance of meeting me again. 1. I made an underground bunker for us deep within the forest near the tree house. So deep and obscure that no one would suspect anything. A bit dramatic, I know, but who are we to underestimate the power of friendship? Leave promptly. The directions are on this slip. Please do not leave any trace whatsoever suggesting you've been here. 2. Do not be seen. People don't know what I know. They don't see what I see. Bad things could happen, and I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want you to be taken away from me, not without saying goodbye. 3. However, in the event you happen to be around people, they sweet talk, try to touch or feed, or in any way try to get closer to them, politely decline their advances and back away as quickly as you can. Do not let them get distressed, upset, or annoyed. It will always make things worse. 4. My family, beware of their behavior towards you and this special treatment. Do not be swayed. They don't know any better and are trying to repair you as if you were near the end of your life as you were before. This goes without saying that that's not the case. If you don't want to live on as you are, do your best not to encounter them and avoid them at all costs. All this is explained that, in the eyes of everyone else, you're still a cat, a missing cat that needs to be put down. Unfortunately, I can't make the decision, but I really want you to be my human friend forever. Whether you want any of this or not, I will never truly know. Choose not to follow this letter, and we won't see each other again, not like this. I'm sorry we didn't know any of this earlier. It's my fault and my selfishness. I would never have wished it to happen this way. I hope one day, whether you decide you can forgive me, I just want to have fun one last time. You were always more than a pet to me, and I couldn't let it go. Maybe after this, I can make peace. Lots of love, Maya. Your childhood instincts are correct. The murderer cannot, in fact, get you as long as you're completely covered by your blanket. That's okay. I'll wait. I think I might be alone. By I Am Furious. I am alone right now. I don't mean that it's just me in the apartment. I mean that there's no one else in the world. I don't know what happened, but 3 days ago I found the sky had gone black and there was no one else alive. Except for the good old internet and news and the phone calls I've sent my parents and coworkers. Let me start on Saturday at 10 p.m. So as part of my onboarding for the new company, I have to do a week or two of each of their product tours. I've already done my tour 3, which is really early in the morning, and tour 2 is default day shift. Tour 1 is dinner to early morning, which is why I'm getting up so early on a Sunday. Something about the official start of the next day being 10 p.m. yesterday or something. I got up at 9 p.m. and the first thing I noticed was just how dark it was outside. Like, darker than it would have been just that late at night. I didn't really think too much about it at the time because I was still tired from trying to adjust to the night shift. I got ready for the day like normal and started my drive to work. I noticed there wasn't much traffic on the highway as I drove to work, which again, I didn't really think anything of because it was late and I was still a little out of it. I didn't even realize anything was really wrong when I got to work. I didn't expect there to be anyone in the office section of the warehouse where I work. I am an operational industrial engineer, so I'm an admin. I go to my workstation, boot it up, check my emails, and begin procrastinating away the next few hours of being the only one in the office. It was around midnight that I thought I'd go to do a walk around the warehouse floor and see what Tour 1 actually looked like. The thing is, there was no one there. This was weird because I was told we pretty much run 24/7 even on holidays. I walked the whole floor and found evidence of activity, like a pallet jack abandoned in the middle of the aisle, a few carts ready to move on to the trucks, but no people. After something like a half an hour trying to figure out where everyone was, I decided that maybe they lied about the holiday part and this Monday was actually one of those random ones that we forgot existed. I laughed and head home, quietly thankful for the extra day to try and acclimatize to the night shift. I was a bit more awake driving home, so I noticed the complete absence of traffic so late at night.
I kind of expected there to be someone out at this time, but again, it was late. I then rationalized that it was a holiday, so of course no one would be out. It was sheer blackness that got me, though. It was dark, the only illumination coming from my headlights and the street lamps. I couldn't see the moon or any stars, just a black as black sky. I guess it was just cloudy and put it out of my mind. When I got home, I immediately went online because I have no life and found absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. I was getting emails like normal. People had posting videos on social media like normal. I even found a few YouTube videos that were posted an hour ago and stuff like that. Things looked normal online. And then it got to be 8 in the morning and I looked outside. It was still black as black outside. It spooked me at first, but then I remembered that it was cloudy outside. Just to be sure, I checked the weather online. The weather said it was clear skies until Friday. I had to stare at that for a bit. Eventually, I had decided that the weather auto location was broken and it thought I was in the next city or something. There was no way you miss clouds like that. It did kind of creep me out how it was constantly dark outside. But it wasn't until the next day that I started to get suspicious. So, 9 at night, it's pitch black out. Get ready, drive to work. As I stand in the parking lot, I realize suddenly that it was warm. I get that nights can be warm sometimes, but this warmth it didn't feel right to me. I shrugged it off as some sort of weather effect. I got into work, checked emails, everything looked normal. Except for the fact that I see emails that suggest that everyone came into work yesterday. I was confused to say the least, and then I went out to walk the floor. It was just like last night, exactly like last night. Stuff was still in the dock waiting to be shipped. A pallet jack was in the middle of an aisle. I walked the floor for an hour, trying to rationalize it until I just decided that somehow the fact that it was still officially Monday meant that it was still a holiday, even if the schedule was weird. My mind ignored the emails telling me that today was not a holiday and assumed that everyone would be normal tomorrow. It was still pitch black out, and there was still no cars on the road. But there were new YouTube videos, there were new emails in my inbox, there were new posts on Reddit and Twitter. Hell, there was a full VOD on Twitch that had clearly been recorded yesterday. But it was still dark when the sun should have been up. My parents live only a few hours away, so if there was severe weather, then my mother would have called me about it, right? I mean, she would have seen it when she drives into work, so I called my parents and asked about the weather. My parents, of course, said that everything was just fine and got really confused when I mentioned the darkness. They rationalized it was just a storm front that they'll be dealing with later this week, and I just agreed with them because it makes sense. It was just a storm front sitting over the city. It was just a holiday. No one drives this late at night. Everything was fine. Everything was normal. And then I went back to work. Now, at this point, pallet jack, yada yada. It suddenly dawned on me that maybe we don't have a night shift. This is just a hazing thing done to the new guy. They say, go to the night shift for a week, and laugh as you walk an empty floor. It makes perfect sense, and the whole making the floor look the same. Clearly, someone was pushing it a little. I just go home for the rest of the week, screw them. They wanted to effectively give me the week off, and I was going to take it off.
It'd be a funny story, and I come in on Monday at the normal time, and we all laugh. There was no one on the road when I went home. It wasn't until dinner for my off-scheduled ass that I realized just how wrong things were. I'd run out of food and decided to go to Havy. The one just down the road was open from 6 in the morning till 11 at night, and it was almost 7 for me. They'd be open. So I go out, get in my car. It was still dark, still off-putting, but I didn't really care at this point. I noticed just how empty the street was, though. My normal shift had me heading to work at this time, and there was a bit of traffic, but there was absolutely nothing. No one was even in Havy's parking lot. No one was in the store. Just my car out there and me inside, walking down the rows of mildly overpriced food items alone. It was weird, and I started to get this feeling that I was being watched whenever I walked by the windows. I pretty much overloaded my cart with stuff and ran to the checkout. Of course, no one was manning anything, but there was a self-checkout. I actually went through and paid for everything I had in my cart before heading to the door. When I got outside, it was like the darkness was thicker, warmer somehow. There was obviously no one out there, but I don't know. I shoved everything into my car and drove off, mostly respecting the speed limits. I was weirded out. I knew something was wrong, but I don't know. I just don't know. Thankfully, there's a garage at my apartment, so I could take my groceries without feeling being watched. But everything looked fine online. I had an idea, though. I could call my mom. My mom would drive up after work. She'd buzz in at the front gate. She'd come to my apartment door and knock. She proved that I wasn't crazy. She proved that it was just foggy and there were clouds and that somehow just happened to miss everyone at the grocery store. So I called my mom. She could tell from the way I was acting that something was really wrong and that she would be driving up immediately. The hour and a half it took for her to get here was the longest in my life. All throughout it, I would peek outside and feel wrong, alone, watched, and then I'd get a buzz on my phone, apartment front door. I let my mom into the building and wait, and then she calls me. My mom was in my apartment, but I couldn't see her. She said that she knocked and eventually tried the handle. I guess it happened that my door was unlocked, except for the fact that my door was locked. She was looking around, my computer was on, apparently, my lights were on, but I wasn't there. My first reaction was that she clearly must have gone to the wrong apartment. I didn't hear knocking because the walls were built right. We both laughed and I go outside to make sure she sees me. She says that I'm not in the hall. I say that's impossible. I FaceTime her and show her the hall that I'm clearly in. She FaceTimes me and shows me the hall that I'm clearly not in. I don't get it. I walk my mom through my apartment with FaceTime and we find out that somehow I haven't been there for 3 days. My fridge is like it was from Saturday. My computer is on and has Reddit open. I make sure she's in my room when I open a YouTube video, but she says she doesn't see anything. She believes me when I say I'm scared. She believes me when I open the blinds and show her the darkness outside. She asks me what that thing in the fog is. What thing in the fog? There is something out there. There is something in the darkness and it is watching me. My mom says that she'll stay on the line and keep me company while I barricade my apartment. Eventually though, she needs to leave. I promise to text her every hour that I'm okay. I actually just texted her right now, funny that. That thing is out there, and somehow it feels like the darkness is pushing in slightly through the windows. I don't know what to do. I'm debating sleeping in the bathroom just to have an extra door between me and it. I'll update you if anything else happens. Update. Something is in my apartment. I can hear it outside my bedroom door. There isn't a lock on it since this is a one-bedroom, so I just have a chair propped up against it to keep it shut. Update. It started knocking. Update. It stopped knocking. Update. I realize I have a window. Update. I am here. I knew that my gambling debts were now insurmountable, so with deep regrets, I wrote a suicide note and loaded my pistol. My wife's insurance payout should net me just enough to buy into a game where I can win it all back, and I'm betting that the cops won't be able to prove it was me. Exploring an Abandoned Warehouse by Stan Cooper 22. Sorry if this is a long post, but I need to share this with someone. There is this abandoned warehouse in the middle of my city. Not in the middle, but in the busy part of the city. The reason no one has done anything about it is because the warehouse used to be owned by a petroleum company. They used it to store oil before the city expanded. Now there's a flyover running over it, and the property is owned by the city and the Railway Commission because of the rail line that runs next to it. Anyway, it's just a building that used to be part of a massive complex of warehouses, silos, and a factory. Now, this one building remains. A friend and I like to explore abandoned places. Mainly for the experience and to imagine what it would have been like when the place was active and functioning. So we were looking for places to explore, and I had known about this location. It is quite close to where we live. So I suggested if we could explore the warehouse. My friend jumped at the chance and we set a date, Saturday morning. We decided to go early in the morning because that area is known for shady things and the nights weren't safe. It also gets busy during the midday. Anywho, we went around 7 a.m., walked over there since it's not too far. When we reached the place, it was messy. Garbage piled up in the corner and the compound wall tagged with graffiti. We had to find a way in. As we walked around, we discovered that there was no way in from the street. It was just wall all the way down. We had to get in from the tracks. So we walked around and entered the railway tracks. From the tracks, you could see the flyover that runs over it and an apartment next to the warehouse. This place is like in the middle of all the action, yet it is in its own bubble, lost to time. On the other side of the tracks is army and railway property. We eventually found a break in the wall that allowed us to enter the place. We had to hop over it, and there was an old broken freezer just lying on the other side. So people have come in here before. When we stepped in, I kid you not, I felt this overwhelming sense of dread. Yeah, it sounds cliche as hell, but I just felt something was off. I told my friend this, and she just shrugged it off, like it was no big deal.
She basically said it was probably because we were trespassing and we could get caught. Inside, there was a lot of overgrown poppy plants and wild weeds just growing out of the cement. We had to trek through this brief bit of foliage, and once we did, we stepped into a compound. The compound was big, but I couldn't sense the size of it because of a good amount was being covered in overgrown wild foliage. But we could see the warehouse building rising over it in an imposing and dilapidated form. My friend was excited to see this. She pulled out her phone and took some pictures. I looked around and the feeling was just getting worse. Then we walked farther in, and that's when I saw it. On the ground, bones, like animal bones. It was a whole field of bones just strewed around on the ground. I freaked. I'm a guy who does not believe in superstition, but I also do think curses and black magic and the supernatural is a possibility. So when I saw a literal compound full of bones, like skulls, femurs, teeth, and a whole animal skeleton compounded with that feeling of intense dread and doom, a feeling that I get when someone close to me is about to die, I wanted to get out of there. I told my friend that we needed to leave. She still wanted to explore. She was walking all over the bones and kicking them around. I was watching this and getting more scared. I asked her why there would be a whole bunch of bones here. She said she didn't know and didn't really care. Now, she doesn't believe in anything supernatural. Ghosts don't exist in her mind, and curses and black magic are just psychological sleight of hand. To be honest, I kind of think the same way, but I also don't dismiss the idea that someone can get cursed or a place can be cursed. So for her, this is just fun. For me, terrifying. I was carefully watching my step, trying my best to avoid the bones. She was just trampling all over them. I didn't want to explore further, and she did. I somehow convinced her that we needed to leave, and she finally conceded, realizing I was actually scared for my life. After we left and on the way back, I realized that feeling had not gone. I told her this. She said I was probably paranoid. Funny thing, I never mentioned this earlier because I personally think it's a coincidence, but there's always that nagging feeling at the back of my mind that it's not. Now, for as long as I can remember, on some level I've had an ability to sense when someone is about to die. Like, they can be healthy, young, old, or sick. But if they are about to die, I can sense it. Many times even before they realize. Like, it only comes when I'm close to the person physically or interacting with them. But I have to be around or in some kind of contact with them. Basically, when I'm with them, I can't get the thought of death out of my head. That was the feeling I was getting when I was with her after we left. Mind you, I never got that feeling before we entered the place. No, I instantly got it after we left. I told her this, like I just told her I thought we might be cursed and that one of us is going to die. She, as usual, made a joke out of it and then semi-seriously said that I wasn't invited to her funeral if she died. But I told her that I was not going back there. She agreed, and we went back home. Cut to a few days later. We had plans to watch a movie when she suddenly canceled on me because she fell sick.
That feeling had not gone. In fact, it came back stronger. She jokingly mentioned it was the curse. I just laughed, but at the back of my mind, I was wondering if it actually was. Then a few days after that, I find out she had been admitted in the hospital. The condition was getting worse. The rest I found out from her parents because she had slipped into a coma shortly after that. The doctors were trying everything, and they couldn't figure out why she wasn't recovering. Then one night, I was just sitting on my computer watching videos when I got the feeling again, stronger than ever this time. Like stronger than I had ever gotten before. Funny thing, no one was around me, and I wasn't talking to anyone either. The only thought I had was someone is going to die, and I couldn't focus on what I was doing, just the thought of death. I thought I was going to die, and the feeling got worse and worse. I tried to fight the feeling and shake it off, but it wouldn't go. Then suddenly it stopped, and all I could feel was sadness. I went to sleep. The next morning, I find out from my parents that my friend had passed away last night in the hospital. I have never been in that warehouse again. Being paranoid about losing sight of my son while in crowded places, I make sure to firmly hold on to the hand of my son while walking through the amusement park. Walking out of the crowded attraction, still holding onto his hand tightly, I then turn around and froze in horror when I realized that the hand I was holding onto was not my child's. And now the stories have come to an end. If you're still awake, well, I hope you fall asleep shortly. And the sounds that you hear in the background are going to take center stage for no more than 30 minutes to help you fall asleep or stay asleep. But if you are awake and want to hear more stories, I do have playlists for that as well. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.